Hi, this is Eric at Try Audio. Today's comparison should be pretty fun. We're going to compare three mid-tier receivers from the late 70s and early 80s. All three are around the same wattage and come from three big players in the hi-fi market: Marantz, Sansui, and Sony. We're going to compare the looks, features, and sound of the Marantz 2252B, the Sansui G-4700, and the Sony STR-V4. Let's get started. The Marantz 2252B was sold between 1977 and 1979 and sold for $460. At 52 watts, it sat in the middle of the Marantz lineup, which was quite large. In 1978, Marantz sold 13 different receivers. Marantz had their budget-oriented models that included their 1500 series and their super high-end models like the 2385 and 2600. In between were the models from the B series that ranged from the 16-watt 2216B to the 130-watt 2330B. The 2252B sat right in the middle of these. The 2252B's $460 price tag equates to about $2,400 in today's money. You can buy a working unit in the $600 to $800 range depending on condition. All right, here we have the 2252B. First thing I'm going to point out, the power button is on the right-hand side. I think this is the only receiver I've ever owned where the power button is on the right. We got the gyro touch tuning, which is fantastic. Two speaker outputs, your typical high filter, loudness, FM muting. Two tape monitors, the ability to record from one tape to another. It has this unusual feature here of dubbing, which basically is the same in and out functions as the tape 2 on the back. And then it has two phono, one aux inputs, bass, mid, and treble controls that you can do each channel differently if you wanted to. I, of course, would never do that. I don't know why anyone would do it, but if you ever take the knobs off, be aware that you want to get the knobs back on lined up. I always spin them all the way around to make sure left and right are lined back up. You got the two FM meters. Thing looks really good. So on the back, we have spring-loaded speaker terminals, two AC outlets, your typical input connections, a totally obsolete Dolby FM decoder receptacle. And I also want to point out we have main in and pre-out connections. There are no jumpers on here because how Marantz did it was the jumpers were internal, and then when you plugged an RCA type plug into the back, it opened those up and separated the preamp from the power amp. The Sansui G-4700 was sold between 1980 and 1982 and cost $430. It was part of the G700 line that ranged from the G4700 up to the G9700. While the G4700 was the smallest of this series, it was not the smallest receiver Sansui had at the time, since they also had the budget receivers like the G301 and G401. At 50 watts, it really sat as a mid-tier receiver. For some background, this is the third different G series. First was the 1000 series, then the 500 series, followed by the 700 series. This G700 series introduced the digital display to the Sansui receivers. This gives it more of an 80s look over the previous models. While I've read that these receivers have problems with some of the digital displays failing, I've had no problem with mine. The G4700's price tag of $430 equates to about $1,600 in today's money. You can buy a used one today for between $300 and $500. So here's the G4700. The first thing I want to point out, these connections here, it is another way to connect to the aux input. So there's a connection in the back and a connection in the front. You can use either one. It's probably a nice feature for today if you want to connect your phone. Has one phono and one true tape input. Two giant knobs in the middle, as usual, two speaker outputs. And then, of course, the digital display, not only telling you what channel you're on, but then the signal and tuning meter, and then power meters, left and right, digital as well. With the blue lights, not too bad looking. So the Sansui has this little shelf that comes out where you make all your connections at. Everything's pretty typical after that. It has screw down speaker terminals, two AC outlets. I will say I don't think this thing is metal. It's more like a fiber board, but you know, other than that, everything looks fine. The Sony STR-V4 was sold between 1978 and 1980 and was from the V series of receivers that went from the 15-watt V1 up to the 150-watt V7. At 55 watts, the V4 sat in the middle of this lineup. Sony had made a big jump in the cosmetics of their receivers when they introduced the prior series, what I'll call the 800 series. The look of these models jumped ahead by quite a bit over the rather common look of the previous generations. The V series followed this 800 series and kept a similar aesthetic. With the volume and tuning knob sitting above the tuning dial, they always looked a bit unusual. Its green lettering even made it look more distinct. Although mine does have the blue lights, which makes the lettering look blue, this receiver's looks stand out over other receivers from the time. The Sony STR-V4 originally sold for $430, which is about $2,000 in today's money. You can pick one up on eBay in the $300 to $400 range. All right, the STR-V4 has got 2 speaker outputs. Typical bass, treble control, high filter, FM muting. It has 1 phono and 2 tape inputs. Nothing designated as an aux input, but with the 2 tape inputs, that should satisfy most needs. Probably the most unusual feature on this thing are the meters. So the leftmost meter is the left channel power meter. The rightmost is the tuning meter, and the middle meter doubles as either the signal or the power meter for the right side, based on that switch right there. So I don't care about the FM signal. I keep it on power meters, so then it functions as the right side power meter. Mine has blue lights in it, so everything shines up blue instead of your typical green, which is what it would look like if you just had white lights. So on the back, nothing unusual. 2 AC outlets, your spring-loaded speaker terminals, and your RCA and antenna inputs. So here are all 3, all lit up with blue lights. All nice looking. You know, you can see how the Sony looks different with the tuning and volume knobs sitting atop the FM AM dial. The Marantz with its more industrial aesthetics. And the Sansui with its digital displays. As far as the cases go, the Sony has these wooden end pieces. Mine, the veneer was peeling off, so I put a new veneer on there and stained it this kind of redwoodish color. The Marantz metal case, and then the Sansui is this wood covered with kind of a vinyl. It's very, not your typical vinyl, not really sure what it is, but I know that ain't wood veneer. One more thing I want to mention, I've been moving these around a lot. The thing I've noticed is this Marantz is way heavier than these other 2. I'm going to put the weights on the screen here so you can see what they are. I don't know what they are, but it's way heavier than the Sansui. And I would say that Sony sits somewhere in the middle weight-wise between the 2. But yeah, the Marantz is hefty, especially when compared to that Sansui. So here they are with the cases off. Got the Sony in the middle, the Marantz over here on the left, the Sansui on the right. The thing that stands out to me is the size of the transformer, which of course adds to the weight. That's really big. That's decently sized. And this one is pretty skimpy. Now the Sansui receiver is later, from the 80s, where they started to skimp on things. And honestly, I'm really starting to notice it. As I mentioned, this board isn't wood, and now I can definitely tell it is just pressed board. It doesn't weigh very much, and the outside case is about one of the flimsiest plywood outside cases that I've ever picked up. Let's measure these power supplies. So the Marantz is about a little over 4 inches. I got the Sony at a little over 4 inches, and the Sansui at under 3 inches. So not only is that your weight difference, but again, the quality that they were starting to cut out of these machines by the 80s. Now let's look at the lights. So of course the Sansui has a digital display, but it has the light for the tuning dial. I believe, if memory serves, it's just this one light down here. It wasn't too bad. If you can solder, you pop that little rubber piece out and solder a new one in there. Easy to get to. You just need to be able to solder. On the Sony, it has a lot more lights. For the tuning dial, it has the fuse style down in there, which isn't too bad. And for the meters, it has these, I believe, pop that out, and it is just a socketed bulb in there. I have LED bulbs. So again, pretty easy, not too bad. And on the Marantz, they're all fuse style on these little boards. The problem is all these little boards are connected by just these clips that are now broken. There are no screws. So like this big board in here has all these fuse style lights. And the only way I could figure to get it out was to try to peel back those little clips, and every one of them snapped off. Every one of them. So now that board just kind of props in there. I need to do something better about that. But anyhow, the lights themselves, easy to replace, just hard to get to. Be prepared to have all those little clips break. A lot of times receivers will reveal their flaws when you listen to them over the years, and I've never noticed any flaws in any of these three receivers. And I've never compared them before in this manner, so I had no idea how this was going to turn out. It was a very interesting exercise. As usual, I would stream the same song into the two receivers and switch them back and forth using the Duke Audio switch to the speakers. Loudness control was turned on. I did not listen to the AM, FM, did not listen to the phono input. I volume matched them. And as far as bass and treble controls, I did make an adjustment, which I will talk about later. Hopefully I remember. And I usually don't, or usually have them all set the same. But in this case, I did make a tweak. In doing this comparison, I listened to three songs: Alive and Kicking by Simple Minds, Luck and Strange by David Gilmour, and Life to Fix by the record company. First comparison I did was the Sansui G-4700 and the Marantz 2252B. On the first song, Alive and Kicking, that song starts with a thumping kick drum, and it has the keyboards, and eventually the bass kicks in, and it is a great sounding song to turn up on a great stereo. And both of these stereos did an excellent job. Here, probably the difference is that while the Marantz had the better bass, slightly, when you switch from the Marantz to the Sansui, everything would just get a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, and the highs were just a little bit brighter. And for that reason, I'm going to give this song to the Sansui by just a hair. They're both sounding great, but there was also a difference in the instrument separation. The keyboards just sound a little more present and clear in the Sansui. On the next song, Luck and Strange by David Gilmour, a bit of a quieter song. Here the drummer is just riding this cymbal throughout the entire song, and in the Marantz, it comes through really good, but on the Sansui, it just gets a little bigger in the sound stage. It turned up really loud. I'll say the Sansui could sound a little harsh on that cymbal. The Marantz always stayed smooth. But with the difference in the sound stage, I'm going to give the edge to the Sansui again. On Life to Fix by the record company, a bit of a more rocking song, even though the instrumentation is pretty minimal. There is a kick drum that just drives that whole song on quarter notes of the 4 on the floor beat. And the difference here I noticed was that kick drum just sounds better on the G-4700. And what is better, I would say, it's just a little clearer. It's got a little more resonance, a little more nuance than the Marantz. Again, a slightly bigger sound stage. Everything sounds a little clearer. So, edge Sansui. It was around this time that I noticed that the Marantz didn't have all the highs that the Sansui did. And I thought, well, am I doing the Marantz a disservice by keeping the treble control straight at 12 o'clock. So I did boost it 1 click to the right on the treble control on the Marantz, and I think it brought it closer into what the Sansui was doing. And I left the Marantz this way for the rest of the comparisons, but I did not boost it on the Sansui. I did, and I was like, that is too much. And I put that back to the 12 o'clock position. But I think that was a fair comparison, boosting the Marantz highs, because the Sansui did have better highs, but taking that off the 12 o'clock position on the Marantz definitely helped. Next, we have the Sony STR-V4 and the Marantz 2252B. Here, I'm going to give all 3 songs to the Marantz for just sounding bigger and better and brighter. The first song, Alive and Kicking, there's some female vocals that really carry the back half of the song, and they're just bigger and brighter on the Marantz than they are on the Sony. Similar things for the David Gilmour song. Everything on the Marantz is just a little bit bigger. The bass is a little clearer. And let me point out that, the Sony doesn't sound bad. You listen to the Sony and it sounds good, and you're like, oh, this is good. And then you switch to the Marantz, and you're like, oh, this is better. The Marantz is just a little bit bigger, a little bit clearer than the Sony. And on the final song, Life to Fix by the record company, this is not as a well-produced song as the other 2 songs, so the differences don't stand out as much, but the differences are still there. Here it's probably with the vocals. The Marantz pushes the vocals out a little bit more on the mix, and they're a little bit more recessed on the Sony. And finally, we have the Sony STR-V4 versus the Sansui G-4700. Going into this, I thought the Sansui was going to crush the Sony because I like the Sansui better than the Marantz, and I like the Marantz better than the Sony, but it was actually closer than I would have thought. I am going to give all 3 songs to the Sansui, however, for just having a bigger, brighter, more forward sound. And I don't want to say bright in a bad way, but it just did the highs better. I forgot to mention in the prior talk that I had boosted the highs, the treble, I should say, on the Marantz. I also did that on the Sony. So the Sony actually has the treble control turned up just a hair. It's not turned up on the Sansui. But even with that treble control turned up, the Sony still sounds a little bit veiled compared to the Sansui. The Sansui is just a bigger sound stage. It's pushing the vocals out there a little bit more. Everything is just a little more clear than they are on the Sony. Again, the Sony sounds good, but the Sansui just sounded a little bit better. I got a second opinion on these from my wife, Laura. She listened to these as well. And the first comparison between the Sansui G-4700 and the Marantz 2252B, on 2 of the 3 songs, she preferred the Sansui. On the David Gilmour song, she actually preferred the Marantz. She thought the Sansui on that particular song could sound a little harsh when turned up. And I agree that some of that wasn't in the Sansui's wheelhouse, and it was the Marantz's. And she thought the Marantz probably did a better job of putting the song out there exactly how it was supposed to be, but still on 2 of the songs preferred the G-4700. When she listened to the Sony STR-V4 and the Marantz 2252B, she gave 2 of the songs to the Marantz. The one she didn't was the David Gilmour song. She said that was a wash, that they did sound different from each other, but not one necessarily better than the other. On the other 2 songs, she gave the Marantz for having a more open, bright feel, bigger feel, whereas the Sony could sound a bit veiled. And on the last one, between the Sony and the Sansui, she's given the Sansui all 3 songs. She said it was really close on the David Gilmour song, that there wasn't, again, a ton of difference, but that sometimes the Sansui just had better highs, made things a little more open, and that sometimes the Sony could sound, again, a bit veiled, a little rolled off on the high frequencies. So to summarize, honestly, all 3 of these are great receivers. The Sony is probably hampered by not having as good of highs as the other 2. As far as instrument separation, I think the Sansui does the best job here of also with the bigger sound stage, better instrument separation, just by a hair over the Marantz. The Marantz sounds really good, and I could see, honestly, if you sat here and listened to these same songs in the same room with me at the same time, and you're like, I like the Marantz better, I wouldn't argue with you. To me, it's just personality. of what you like at that point. And for me, I just liked the Sansui a little bit better than the Marantz. I think the Sony being in third place is probably where most people would put it. Not that it sounds bad, but compared to the other two, just not as bright and big. Again, frequencies probably have rolled off on the high end on the Sony. And finally, for value, I'm going to give it to the Sansui. The Sansui costs a lot less than the Marantz. For the Marantz, you're paying for the name. You're also getting probably better looks, better build quality. It is a more stout receiver with more features than the Sansui. But if those features don't matter to you and it is literally just sound and cost, then the Sansui is the way to go. The Marantz is you're paying that Marantz tax, and it's never going to be a great deal, but a great sounding receiver nonetheless. But as far as value goes, you can spend not a whole lot of money and get a G-4700 and get a great sounding receiver. So that wraps it up. I want to thank you for watching.